Introduced to this program this afternoon. Our speaker is Dr. Mhammad Benaboud, who is professor of higher education at the Abdulmalik Sadi University of Tetuan. He's very well educated. He received his PhD from Edinburgh University in Scotland. Well, it's one of the great. I've always been a great admirer of Edinburgh University. I didn't know that until I just saw this. And he's been a professor in Rabat. He's been done. I won't read all this, but he's been doing research at many universities, and his field is the field of Andalus. And he gave a very interesting talk I heard at Georgetown yesterday on this field. So we're really looking forward to what he has to say this afternoon. I can just say on a personal note, the way he happens to be here is that in early January 2007, I was invited to go to a conference in Rabat, Morocco, the capital city of Morocco. It was a UNESCO conference on the theme of creating a European digital library. And the UNESCO was involved in this conference, and they knew that we were here at the Library of Congress. We're working with UNESCO on creating a world digital library, and the idea here was to somehow mesh the Maghreb digital library with the world digital library, and we're hoping to do that as we move forward. But I was very impressed with the work that Professor Benaboud was doing on Tetuan. I was very interested in his center and in the content that he had. So we invited him to come here. We had some logistical delays and so on. So he's here a few months later than we had first expected. But we're pleased that he's here nonetheless, and we welcome him and look forward to hearing what he has to say. And finally, let me thank also the Africa Middle East Division for co-sponsoring this event, for co-hosting Dr. Benaboud when he's here, and for sharing with him their expertise about Moroccan culture as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind presentation. I would first like to thank the Library of Congress with its different divisions for having kindly invited to come here. And I would most particularly like to thank Mr. John van Oudenaren, who has been very patient with me. And we were both very patient, I would say. So I'm only about 1 year late, but that's okay. I would also like to thank the people in the Middle Eastern department, and I would also like to thank all those who prepared this my trip here, especially Ms. Donna Sokol and other people. We had to solve some logistical, let's say, problem, and Michelle and the rest. But here I am in the biggest library in the world, I suppose. So it's a big honor and a pleasure for me, not only to give this lecture, but to be here and to have visited all the different departments. And I'm one of the defenders of libraries in Tetuan, but I will go back with a different notion of what a library is after having been here. And also this was an opportunity for me to give a lecture yesterday at Georgetown University, and there was quite a lot of interest, and the discussion was very interesting, and that was very interesting as well. And so so far I've been enjoying my stay here. I hope that the snowstorm predicted for tomorrow doesn't affect my tour around Washington, D.C. It wasn't a long time since I last had a visit. It was only back in 1975 when I finished my studies in a university in San Diego and crossed the U.S. in a Greyhound bus and was on my way to home, and I stopped here and I had a half-day tour, and I quickly went to New York because I had to be there for the plane. So I would like to thank you very much, and I hope that this is only the beginning of a much longer program of collaboration, and it is really an honor for a small but cultural town like Tetuan to have this sort of ties with such a big institution. But we are very proud of our culture, and this is what I will try to do right now. I have the privilege of about 40 minutes to defend the culture of Tetuan, which is a World Cultural Heritage City since 1997. So I won't stick to the text, which will be placed on the internet, but I would like, as I talk, to show you some images. This is a CD-ROM which I made on the traditional arts of Tetuan. I will put on the sound and the commentary. This is me speaking, but I will give a different speed. But I think the images are... This is an interactive CD-ROM, so it works automatically. So this is the part on the traditional arts. And you can have an idea of what the private houses, for example, the traditional arts of Tetuan, the mosaics, because the title of the lecture is the specificity and the world cultural heritage dimension, and I think you will see through some of these images why it was so easy to classify Tetuan as a world cultural heritage. So Tetuan is the largest North Moroccan Mediterranean city. It is only 10 kilometers away from the Mediterranean Sea. And we have some of the most beautiful beaches which spread all the way towards the Algerian frontiers in one direction and towards Europe in the other. So it is really, we have a very mild climate, a bit humid, but we have some of the most beautiful beaches. Tetuan is on the mountain side. It's called the Mount Jorges. And it's on the edge of the Rif, the range of the Rif Mountains. So the mountains in Tetuan are green because the clouds come from the sea, and they're blocked by the mountains, and it rains quite a lot, unlike other parts of Morocco. So it can be rainy on one part of the mountain and very sunny on the other side. But the mountains are very, very beautiful. We have waterfalls. We have the biggest lake inside a mountain in Africa. We have rivers. The mountainous region of northern Morocco is very, very beautiful. And we have culture. So we have some of the most beautiful Mediterranean beaches. We have, because they haven't been exploited, by tourism. Sometimes you have to have a choice between the conservation of nature or money through tourism. Rarely can you have both. And the Costa del Sol, just across the Mediterranean, hardly 60 kilometers away from Tetuan, is a good example of, is a very good bad example of how you can destroy your ecosystem if you want, in order to make a lot of money. The problem, and we have the Medina of Tetuan, which is 5 centuries old and which is one of the most interesting Medinas or historical cities in Morocco. Its specificity, for example, is that it had been destroyed by the Spaniards in the early 15th centuries, and it was rebuilt by about 100 people who immigrated from the city of Granada to Tetuan. So it was reborn as an Andalusian city on Moroccan soil. And some of the architectural monuments in Tetuan are exact reproductions of, for example, there's an arch which is a reproduction of the arch you find in the entrance of the Alhambra Palace, which I like to visit. The first time I visited, I was 11 years old. The last time was about 1 month ago. So, and it is one of the most beautiful monuments in the world. So it was born on, it was reconstructed, reborn as an Andalusian city. Despite all of these resources, the tourism in Tetuan needs to be developed. It was much more active during the 60s than it is now. So we have all these resources, but there are other obstacles which I would not like to discuss now, which have impeded the development of tourism in Tetuan. But I mean, the potential is tremendous because you have mountains, beaches, and culture in one city. When I was in Japan, I visited a city called Sendai, which lived on tourism, which lived on one monument, the castle, which had been destroyed during the 19th century. And I was there, and there was a sign which said, "This is the site of the castle." I said, "Where's the castle?" The castle had been destroyed, but the image of the castle, they have this enormous museum of the castle. So you have, for example, armaments or arms during the period of the castle, dressed during. But there was no castle, but the memory of the castle was enough to promote tourism. Here we have so many beautiful monuments, and we have very little tourism. I wouldn't say we have a lot of internal tourism, because everybody from the other parts of Morocco, which are very hot in the summer, everybody spends. This is one of the most popular areas for the summer, but we don't have tourism from abroad, even though we're very, very close to the Straits of Gibraltar, only 40 kilometers away. It's like going from one part of Washington to another, going to Georgetown or the Dallas airport or whatever. So our association, the Tetuan Asmira Association, it tries to promote the culture of Tetuan, to make it known, to defend the historical monuments, to defend the historical city. Tetuan, by the way, is divided into three parts, geographically and historically. We have a 5-century-old Medina, or historical city of Tetuan, which is the most important part of the city for many reasons. Then we have a Spanish colonial town built on Moroccan soil between 1912 and 1956. That was when Tetuan, because Morocco was divided into French protectorate, Spanish protectorate, and the international zone of Tangier. And Tetuan was the capital, the political and administrative capital of the Spanish protectorate in Morocco. So the Spaniards did an excellent job, because they built what we call the ensanche for themselves. But it's very interesting as well, the ensanche is, because it reflects all the different architectural trends of the first half of the 20th century there, and which have been destroyed in many Spanish cities, and which still exist in Tetuan, because the ensanche is where all the administration is now, all the commerce, all the banks, everything. That's where it is. And then there's a third part which is much bigger but much less beautiful, which developed since independence in 1956. Now, one of the most important factors which have contributed to the economic development of our region, and which will continue to contribute to the development of our city and northern Morocco, is the presence of our King, His Majesty Mhammad V, who likes to spend his summer vacations in Tetuan. So when he comes, everybody comes, the press, the government, everybody, and then we have a chance to expose our problems and to defend ourselves more efficiently, because he used to come to our beaches when he was still the hereditary prince, and he has some very nice memories of that period. So he likes to also, because our beaches are just fantastic. So that's why he comes, and it's very good that he comes. He receives heads of states there during the summertime. He spends his summertime between Tangier and Tetuan, and he celebrates some of the official feasts which we have there. So it's very, very important, because the press and everybody becomes interested all of a sudden in Tetuan, because officially the Ministry of Tourism and Culture and so on, they stress other cities like Marrakesh and Fez and Rabat, which is fine, but we also like to demand our share of that interest. So Tetuan's specificity on the one hand, and its international Tetuan's specificity on one hand and its international connections have always complemented each other. On the one hand, the apparent contradictions and complexities of its historical dimension have sometimes been misunderstood. On the other, the city's cultural heritage and the common cultural identity, which has always been strongly reflected in the collective consciousness of its inhabitants, stand out. Politically and militarily, Tetuan has traditionally been threatened by the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and the neighboring tribes, especially during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Both when it existed as an independent city-state, this was during the 16th and most of the 17th century, or when it became a province of the Alawi dynasty beginning from the early 18th century, which is the present ruling dynasty. The need to defend the city against the external threats has undoubtedly contributed to encourage its autonomous rule and to create a strong feeling of unity among its inhabitants. The privilege geographical situation of Tetuan lies in the fact that it has been one of the most flourishing Mediterranean ports during the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries up to the 19th century. Its connections were very strong with Marseille, for example, with Cadiz, with England, with Italy. So on the one hand. On the other hand, all the internal cities like Fez, which had very strong commercial relations with other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, also exported their merchandise through the ports of Tangier and Tetuan. So it has been one of the most important ports, and commerce has always been important. So it's very close to the Straits of Gibraltar. So it lies in a very strategic situation. Even, I mean, it's a city you cannot ignore even if you wanted to. So this is very important. As a result, from the cultural point of view, it has always had strong relations with internal cities like Fez, for example. Fez, which was the most important cultural city in Morocco, and with Spain, very, very strong historical and cultural relations with Spain, and also with some of the countries in the Middle East, especially Egypt. The relations were either for religious reasons but also for cultural reasons. During the early part of the 20th century, many students from Tetuan went to Cairo to study in the Egyptian universities, and there were some strong contacts between some of the leading Egyptian intellectuals of the time and some of Tetuan's leading intellectuals. They were friends. For example, Mhammad Benaboud wrote articles in Al-Ahram newspaper during the War of the Rif. The contacts were very, very strong, and they have always been. And Arabic has been very, very strong in Tetuan, especially during the period of the Spanish protectorate. And the reason is that the Spaniards had their Spanish newspaper, so the Moroccans, in order to express their cultural identity, they also had their own newspapers, their magazines, their theater, they had their research centers, they had their public. It was a really active cultural center at the national level, and this was so thanks to its very, very close links with the Egyptians in particular, but also with other countries in the Middle East, like Lebanon, for example. From the social point of view, I will not stick to this lecture because it will be available in the internet, but I will refer to the main points. For example, from the social point of view, Tetuan has been composed of many different ethnic groups, and that's why it's such an interesting society. It was rebuilt after being destroyed by the Andalusians during the late 15th century, and after they were expelled, definitely, after 1492. Many Andalusians settled in Tetuan, and the nucleus of the city from the urban point of view is an Andalusian city. And you can see the Andalusian influence is very strong in the traditions, for example, in the Andalusian music. For example, no wedding in Tetuan is complete without an orchestra of Andalusian music, in the jewelry, in the dress, in the dialect, in many aspects. In the architecture, certainly the traditional Tetuani houses are Andalusian houses, and they're different. The architecture and the traditional arts of Tetuan have been marked directly by Andalusian, by the Andalusian culture. Also, we have had strong commercial and political and diplomatic relations with the Mediterranean world. For example, during the 18th century, Tetuan was the diplomatical capital of Morocco, and because the even though the real capital was Fez, the diplomat capital was Morocco, and the ambassadors were received in Tetouan until in the second part of the 18th century, the capital, the diplomatic capital of Morocco was moved from Tetouan to Tangier. So for a long time it was a capital of Morocco from the diplomatic point of view. Tetouan became quite important from 1912 to 1956 as the capital of the Spanish protectorate in Morocco. This was very interesting because it developed in a different way than Rabat and the south of Morocco. For example, the Spanish language is much more common in northern Morocco, and it was not. It was only after independence that the French was introduced. It was the whole area was ruled by Spain, not by France. And instead of the Sultan, we had the Khalifa, or representative of the Sultan in northern Morocco, who had his palace and his own administration. And some branches of this government were completely independent, like Islamic law, for example, was completely independent from the other branches of law during the period of the protectorate. And from the architectural point of view, it is very interesting that the Ensanche, or the Spanish time, was very influenced by the architecture of the Andalusian city of Tetouan. The Spanish architects saw their own roots in Tetouan. They felt that this was an Andalusian city which had been very well conserved, and they were inspired by it. And so the Spanish city which they built, is very harmonious with the traditional Moroccan Andalusian city. For example, they used the same construction materials for building the Ensanche, which is based on limestone, which is available and very cheap. The Ensanches, all the buildings, they're European and modern, but they are whitewashed, just like the Andalusian cities in the Medina of Tetouan. Then you find some arches in some of the buildings in the Ensanche, just like, so the influence was very, very strong. And from the historical point of view, I would say that Tetouan's history consists of a city which rose all the way to the top and then fell all the way to the bottom and then was able to rise again, and so on. For example, if we start with its refoundation in the early 16th century, late 15th, it was built by Andalusians. So it had been completely plundered because they used to attack the ships, Spanish and Portuguese ships. There was warfare, maritime warfare, and commerce at the same time. They went hand by hand, no problem. So it had been destroyed, and it was rebuilt as an Andalusian. So it was born as a city. This, I think, is very important. We have always considered ourselves to be citizens, despite the very strong contacts with the surrounding tribes and rural areas. So the Tetouani society is composed of the Arab elements in the Jbala region, Arabic-speaking tribes, the Rif, the Berber-speaking tribes in northern Morocco, the Andalusians. It's composed by, since the 19th century, when Algeria was occupied by France in 1830, many Algerians from the cities of Tlemcen and Algiers came to Tetouan by sea, and they settled. This is very important because that's how the Ottoman cultural tradition was introduced in Tetouan. So that, for example, as far as the cuisine in Tetouan, some dishes you can find in Tetouan, in Sarajevo or Istanbul, you won't find them in Fez or Rabat. The cuisine, influence in the dress, jewelry, embroidery, dialect, many words. The Ottoman influence through these Algerian immigrants has been very, very, and you can see that in the names. For example, you find many Andalusian names in Tetouan which you think are Spanish, like Torres, Lucas, names like Ragon, which is Aragon, Pais, which is the same, Sordo, which is the same, many families, and the same thing, some of the Algerian names like Belkach, for example. And You find also immigrants from Fez are very strong since the 17th century. They have been very strong, and you can see that in many of the religious brotherhoods in Tetuan, which were originally, which were established in the 17th century as branches of the brotherhoods of Fez, like the Fasi Brotherhood or Al-Qadiriyya or Kitsaniya Brotherhood. So it has received cultural influences over the different last five centuries. Also, Tetuan has received groups of people from different parts of Morocco, all parts of Morocco. The Jewish community of Tetuan has been very, very important. The Jewish quarter of Tetuan is inside the Medina. The Medina, the wall is 5 kilometers long. It's very long, and it has 7 gates. So is the biggest Jewish quarter in Morocco. And the religious traditions of the Jews of Tetuan has been directly inspired by Al-Andalus, because they immigrated from Al-Andalus to Tetuan. Unlike Fez, for example, where the Jews of Al-Andalus immigrated, and the Jewish community, the Moroccan Jewish community in Fez, had already existed. So they had different traditions. In Tetuan, they settled and conserved. Tetuan has been a conservative town, so they conserved their own religious. There were up to 17 small synagogues at one point. Now there's one which has been restored, and it's a traditional Muslim Tetuani house transformed to serve as a synagogue. Also, so you have, if you stand in the main square where the royal palace is right now, you can enter the Islamic Medina through one of its gates directly, side by side with the royal palace. On your right hand side, you go directly to the Jewish quarter, and behind you, if you decided to go backwards, you would find yourself in the Christian Spanish city called the Ensanche. So these three cultures and religions actually meet physically and from the urban and architectural point of view in one square, in one, which is really the breathing heart of the whole city of Tetuan. So as far as the main church or cathedral of Tetuan in the Ensanche is a very beautiful church, and it still stands there. And even though some of the icons there would probably disturb Spaniards more than they would Moroccans, nobody seems to be concerned about them, because there's a cross and an eagle. The cross represents Christianity or the Catholic Church. The eagle represents the Franco movement, and there was an alliance between them during the Protectorate. So it's there in the architecture, but hundreds and thousands of people pass by. Nobody seems to be concerned, but I'm sure the Spaniards would be more sensitive to these things. The Medina of Tetuan reflects 5 centuries of history. The reason is that different quarters have been developed, or the urban expansion and development has occurred over the last 5 centuries, which means that you can live 5 centuries of history through one visit of about 1 hour and a half, because you can enter the 15th century nucleus of the city. You find the Kasbah, for example, and some arches which were just built by the founder, Al-Mandari. You can continue through 17th century street and visit some of the 17th century, like the Naqsi's house, who were the rulers of Tetuan during the 17th century, and appreciate the architecture, which is a reproduction of the Morisco architecture in the Iberian Peninsula. So you can find some mosques which were built during the 18th century, for example, or some private houses which were built during the 18th century, and then others you can end up in a different quarter which was built during the 19th century or the early part of the 20th century. So and this is just visiting about 1/3 of the Medina. By visiting, you can live or relive 5 centuries of history by visiting one part of the Medina. And this evolution is clear, for example, in many aspects of the Medina of Tetuan. It is clear, for example, there is a division according to the functions, three general divisions of these different quarters. One is you have some residential areas which are very, very quiet and peaceful. You have some commercial areas which are very active, entire streets where you have little shops and markets in some squares. And the third type is the craftsmen, the quarter where the craftsmen are, because Tetuan has been an industrial city in the sense that it produced some very interesting objects. It used to export, for example, silk during the 19th century. It used to grow silk and make cloth and export it. And also the outskirts of Tetuan is a place where you have many farms which are where you find a variety of fruits and cattle and so on. And there's a river also which crosses the two rivers, the two mountains. One and so Tetuan is built on the edge of one of them, the Dersa mountain, which overlooks this river. And during the Roman times, the ships used to enter from the Mediterranean all the way to the Roman city of Tamuda, which is only 5 kilometers away from Tetuan on the road to Shawin. So the river has been very, very important. So we have the sea, we have the river, we have mountains, we have plains. I think the geography is very, very, very rich. Although it is not a very fertile land, but it's important from the strategic point of view, and it's important as a cultural city. So the division of the Medina, according to functions, is very interesting, but it was not planned. The only part of the Medina which was planned is the Jewish quarter, because it was rebuilt actually it was moved from one part of the Medina to another during the early 19th century. So the streets are linear and others are perpendicular according to the model of Western cities. But the Medina of Tetuan, you have many narrow streets. It appears to a foreigner to be a labyrinth. You can get lost. But there's a certain internal logic which is not the same as one you'd expect from the town planners of. I think it has its charms, and also it was built on a hill, so from certain parts of the city you can see the plains and the sea. If you compare it with Fez, for example, Fez is like a well. You enter the gate and you start going down until you reach the bottom, then you start going up. But Tetuan is built on a very nice round hill overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. So from which you can also see the mountains. And the grand mosque was built on the highest spot, so that the minaret of the great mosque can be seen from anywhere in the surrounding areas. Even though the city has grown tremendously in a rather archaic manner, but the great mosque can still be seen from a very long distance. Along with the division of the functions of the city, the evolution is very interesting. For example, the 17th century houses of Tetuan are completely different from the 18th or 19th or 20th century houses. The 17th century houses were very simple, Mediterranean style houses. They had an open courtyard with rooms, and then a first floor built on very solid about 8 pillars and arches, using limestone. They were whitewashed. There were no tiles. There was also there was usually a fountain either in the middle or on the side. And this is the reason is that there are two features which are very interesting in Tetuan. The city of Tetuan was built on the mountain, on a rock. And there is a network of underground caves which spread under the city. They are the result of a second network of water, which we call the Skundu water network, and which is an underground network. It starts from the top of the mountain, and so these wells are probably the result of this water over many, many centuries. But during the 16th century, the Tetuanis used to imprison the Portuguese captives in a prison, an underground prison, in the heart of the Medina. And in part of this underground prison, you have a church, because they allowed them to build an altar in order to worship, and then during the daytime they built the city wall. Now, our association would like to see a museum of the, in Spanish they're called masmorras, in Arabic al-matamir. I mean, it's very interesting. Anyone would like to visit a Christian church under an Islamic city from the 16th century. And this was a system in the Mediterranean. I mean, it was not particular to Tetuan. In Cáceres and other Spanish cities, in Italy, in Algiers, they had these underground prisons. And in Spain, many of them can be visited as museums. So the Tetuani captives would be, let's say, lodged in these underground prisons in Spain or Portugal or other parts of the Mediterranean, and vice versa. So it's very interesting in the 16th century context. And it's only about 150 square meters, and we have been able to open a door and to go down to it, and they had built these brick arches there, and the altar is still there. So I mean, it wouldn't be very difficult to. We have been trying to convince the local authorities to build this museum, but so far we haven't been completely successful. But we are hopeful. So. I think this is very interesting. So as far as the water network, which has existed for over 4 centuries, they built these pipes across the city in different directions. So you have many of the public fountains used to be fed, and some still are, with this water, underground water. Many of the houses, you see this water goes from house to house, to mosque, to house, and it spreads all over the city, and then it ends up in the river. So it is very warm water during the winter, and it is cold during the summer because of the rocks through which it passes. It is not drinking water, but it's used for cleaning and so on, and it is used to for these fountains inside the houses. That's why you have many fountains in the Tetuani houses. Okay, so you have seen one part. Now we'll see the part on the architecture as I talk. As far as this Skundu water system, it has had some competition recently from the local water and electricity company, which has introduced its water to the Medina, and therefore, on the pretext of digging their own, tubes and so on, they have been destroying some of the Skundu water tubes. But I think it's very interesting, and we're very proud of this water system as part of the cultural heritage of the city. From the historical point of view, as I said, the history has gone up and down. So, for example, you can say that it had been destroyed, then it was rebuilt during the 16th century. Then one very important point in our history is the War of Tetuan of 1860, when the Spanish army occupied the city for 2 years and did not leave the city until the Moroccan Sultan had to pay a an enormous fine. The British paid part of the fine because they didn't want the Spanish army in Morocco because they were our number one business partners, and the Moroccans couldn't pay the rest because the government was virtually bankrupt. So the Spaniards decided to occupy the ports of Morocco and to get the taxes and this was one of the causes of the financial crisis of the Moroccan government during the 19th century, which paved the way to the protectorate. So, here Moroccan history is going down, and then the city of Tetuan became the capital of northern Morocco, and it started to prosper again, especially not only from the economic and social, but from the cultural point of view. I have not been following my paper very strictly because I think it would be more interesting to speak a bit more spontaneously. But I would just like to speak about some of the cultural and artistic traditions in Tetuan. One of the projects which we have been carrying out at the university and the Tetuan Asmir Association is we have catalogued many of the over 30 private libraries in Tetuan, as well as some of the public ones. And as a result, we have discovered many manuscripts by local Tetuani scholars. And some of these libraries are historical libraries, like the Dawood Library. Some of these libraries, I'm stressing the libraries because I'm in a library and I'm sure some people would be interested in what I have to say about the libraries. But I mean, this is a unique project to catalog 30 private libraries in one city. And only our students could have achieved such a feat, because if the government officials, for example, were to knock on the doors of these families and ask them, could we please be allowed to catalog your libraries, they would have probably said, no, because maybe the wife would ask them to come in the morning and they would only be able to come in the afternoon because they have work, but the students would come at any time because they have to do that work for their professors. And so it's a good deal for everyone. It's a good deal for the professors because we have a very good idea of the content of over 30 private libraries in the city of Tetuan, and about 8 or 10 in Al-Qasar Al-Kibir, a couple in Tangier, many more in Shawin, and in the city of La Rash. All of these cities are in northern Morocco, and it's interesting that we found many manuscripts which were written by the owners of these libraries. And it was interesting for the families because they're usually the descendants of these scholars are usually not scholars, so they would just lock those books in a room, and we would catalog the books for them, ask them to buy shelves, and then give them a copy of the catalog, and that way they would be able to know what they own. From the students' point of view, we would meet with them and orient them as far as bibliography is concerned, the importance of making catalogs, the importance of the project, what they must do, what they must not do in order for the project to be successful. And in the beginning, many of their friends would make jokes of them and say, we are writing real historical essays, whereas you are just copying down titles. But then when they would need to make their bibliography, they would go to those students working on the libraries and ask them, could you please check whether my bibliography is well made? And so we convinced them of the importance of making catalogs of bibliographies, and I think it has been a very successful project, and it's a self-financing project. And so we like to be independent, and the only way to do that is not to depend on anybody else from the financial point of view, and we are very proud of that. So these scholars are very interested, first half of the 20th scholars, and I would just like to introduce the works of some of them. The historian Mhammad Benaboud left the biggest private library of Tetuan, and his daughter Hasna Dawood has done an extraordinary job of making a catalog for the whole library and opening it to the public from about 1 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a small library, but it is a very, very rich library. She has over 500 manuscripts. She has about more than 25,000 books in Arabic and other languages. She has an extraordinary collection of documents, some consular documents. And, for example, she has a document signed by Queen Isabella II of Spain. She has documents from the consulate of Italy, from Spain, and many other countries. She has an extraordinary collections of Egyptian newspapers like Al-Ahram during the 40s and 50s, for example, and 60s, as well as most of the national newspapers of the time, and perhaps equally important, many of the local newspapers which used to be published in Arabic and some of them in Spanish in Tetuan, as well as many magazines. Now, Dawood is one of the most eminent intellectuals of the city. He founded, for example, the first Arabic magazine in Morocco in 1933, which is called As-Salam, or Peace. It's a very nice magazine. And he wrote a lifeline, his lifetime project was a history of Tetuan, which is called the history of Tetuan, Tarikh Tetuan, which begins from the beginning, and especially the reconstruction of the city, and goes all the way to the period of the protectorate. His daughter has published the latest volumes, the 10th volume, and each volume is around 300 or 400 pages, some of them 600 pages, I think, if I'm not wrong. And the latest one, which is being published, is very, very interesting because it is an account of the history of Tetuan during the period of the protectorate. Now, here you have the historian is not just basing his history or his historiography on the old sources, but he is a testimony. He lived during that period. He was a contemporary figure, and he wrote, and he participated in the nationalist movement, and he wrote the history of the protectorate during which he had lived. And I think this is very, very interesting. And he is, for example, one of the founders of the first private school of Tetuan. He was involved in education. He was involved in many cultural activities, and he is an extraordinary figure. And he left this 15-volume history of Tetuan. I mean, not many cities. I mean, Tetuan is a small city, but it has a big history. 15 volumes. I mean, I don't know. Has anybody written a 15-volume history of Washington, D.C., for example? And he has also written other books like the Numismatic History of Morocco. He has written 1001 Proverbs. He has a manuscript which is very, very interesting, which we hope his daughter will edit very soon, because she's also a very good, distinguished scholar, and she has edited the latest volume of her father. The reason is she used to sit by. She's the youngest of many brothers and sisters. And she used to sit a lot by her father's side, and he was on his deathbed, and he asked her to give him a promise that she would take care of his library after he died, and she has done an extraordinary job. We helped her make a computer catalog of that library. We didn't really do much. We just showed her how to use the computer, and she did the rest. And I think she's doing an extraordinary job. Although now she's writing newspaper articles saying that this is a very important library, and I'm not going to live forever, and the local authorities should contribute to assure the future of this library. And she has some extraordinary manuscripts. She has a collection of over 15,000 photographs in black and white, and it's a very, very rich library indeed. Then you have the other historian who was the master of Dawood, who was Ahmed Arhoni, who was a great faqih and alim, a scholar. He wrote a 10-volume history of Tetuan. This is a completely different history because it's a social and cultural history. For example, volume 2 of this, it's called Umdat al-Rawin fi Tarikh Tetuan, and the author is Ahmed Arhoni. A great jurist as well. He has left some publications in Islamic fiqh, some verdicts or fatwas. And he wrote a 10-volume history. For example, volume 2 is a history of the traditions of Tetuan. Volume 3 is a dictionary of the dialect of Tetuan. And the rest is a biographical dictionary of the scholars of Tetuan and of Fez, because that was where he did his education. So the part on Fez is interesting because the Fasis did not tend to write about their own scholars, because you only write about someone if you come from outside. So I think this book is very interesting. So what we have done in our association, we have tried to edit and publish many of these works which we discovered in these libraries. For example, among our over 90 titles, we have published about 6 volumes of Ahmed Arhouni's History of Tetouan, Umdat al-Rawin. Another very interesting scholar, and as you may notice, they're completely different from each other, is the faqih, the jurist, Muhammad al-Murir, who wrote a biographical dictionary of Tetouan and its region. This is a very, very interesting book, which reproduces the scholars in the neighboring areas of Tetouan, in the rural areas where the Arabic culture has been widespread to a great extent. And I think, for example, he wrote the biography of some of the greatest Sufi masters of the different schools, like Benajiba or Al-Harraq, who created a 19th century brotherhood in Tetouan, and others. And it's very, very... Al-Murir was a very high-level literary figure. I mean, his Arabic style is very, very sophisticated, and a very great jurist, because he worked as a judge in northern Moroccan cities during most of his life. So as you can see, this is a different type of publication. We also have another figure of Tetouan, Sami al-Wazani, who was a very interesting literary figure, and he a prolific writer. And here we will see some of Tetouan's manuscripts from the private libraries of Tetouan, especially from the Dawood Library, here on this CD-ROM on the traditional arts of Tetouan. There's a commentary, but I have, because you cannot hear the commentary and my commentary at the same time. But these are some of the manuscripts from the Dawood Library. We selected them for their beauty and their specificity and their world cultural dimension, I would say, because they're very unique. This is a 19th century, for example, manuscript by Mhammad Benaboud. This is the book I told you about. Yeah. And they're completely different from each other. This is some of these manuscripts are, for example, on Andalusian music, like Kunnash al-Hayek. There's a copy of the Quran which is 600 years old from Al-Andalus, which is here. So, there's a 19th century. Yeah, this is it. It's a marriage contract from the 19th century. It's absolutely beautiful, by Mhammad Benaboud. He certainly had the time to do it. Sami al-Wazani wrote, for example, the first autobiographical novel in the history of Moroccan literature. Before finishing, I would like to show you some parts of our this is the Quran, I think. Yeah, it's about 600 years old, and it's written on deer skin. Sami al-Wazani was a very interesting figure because he wrote an autobiographical novel which reflects his life in the Brotherhood of Al-Harraq. This is the poetry presented in geometric forms. It's very interesting. So the history of Tetouan is very strong from the cultural point of view, because of its you can say that many of these scholars were educated in the old Andalusian traditional style. But beginning from the first part of the 20th century, you had very strong cultural ties with Spain and Europe on the one hand, and with the Middle East on the other hand. So what happened during the first part of the 20th century is you had different groups of intellectuals who were formed and related to different cultures. So, and also the presence of Spanish culture in Tetuan over a period of more than 40 years was also very, very important, because it enabled many Tetuanis to open themselves to the world, because the character of the Tetuani tends to be very this is our website on the internet, and the address is medina.tetuanasmir.org. And these are some of the pictures from the houses of Tetuan. For example, this is a 19th century house, which, okay, I'll show you two houses so you can see the difference. This is the house of the Naxis. So here you have about 8 pillars, and you have some features where you can only find in Spain, and so on. So it's, let's see, sorry. No. Yeah, this is the Naxis house. So you can see it resembles some of the Spanish monasteries. The mosaics are not original. They were added after it was restored. So compare or contrast the simplicity here. These are some of the more extravagant houses, for example, of this is the Naxis house. So as you see, it's whitewashed. There's a fountain in the middle. The mosaics were added, but you have some features like these, you know, which you find in some of the Christian monasteries, but you don't find them in Tetuan. This is the Brisha house. This is a traditional late 19th century house, where you find, for example, the introduction of many elements, such as mosaics and other elements. This is a traditional room in Tetuan for receiving visitors. And as you can see, there are many elements. Here you have typical Tetuani embroidery. Here you have some carpets which were imported from England, from Manchester, especially for these Tetuani sofas. So that's the commerce. You have some mirrors which were probably imported from France or Italy. Here you find some Chinese plates and vases. It's very interesting. There's a historian of art from Tetuan, and Dr. Nadia Razini, who graduated from Oxford University. She wrote a very interesting article of how this Chinese and especially Japanese 19th century ceramics were exported to Europe, and then the Tetuanis would buy them and use them in their houses. So you have quite a lot of 18th and 19th century plates and vases from Japan. Or I took a Japanese scholar to a house and I told him, we have some China plates. He said, no, that's a Japanese plate. And the reason is that during the 19th century, the Japanese began to reproduce Chinese plates in large quantities to export them to Europe. And then from there, some of the richer merchants of Tetuan would buy them and use them to decorate these houses. So even though the architecture is very typical Tetuani, for example, why is the architecture of Tetuan different? Because for a foreigner, it's a Moroccan house, whether it's in Fez or whether it's in other parts of Morocco, it's the same type of architecture. But that is not the case. For example, look at these tiles. There's about 8 or 9 reasons why it's different from that of Fez. One, the pieces are extremely small. Each one of them is small. I'm just going to bring tiles as an example. I could speak about wood or carved or painted wood or other traditional arts, but they're very small. Look at this little piece, for example. It's the size of this fingernail, and each one is installed. So the construction material from which it is made is different from that of fence. It's local mud or whatever. Each little piece is baked individually. And then, after it's brought out, this coloring is made of different mixture of different minerals. And then it is reintroduced into the oven, which can be 800 degrees or more, and it is baked. Each little piece is baked individually. The result is, since this coloring product is a liquid, it is like, it gives a curved form once it is baked. So it is very smooth, because it used to be liquid, thick liquid, and then it hardens after it's baked. Because it's not completely flat, it reflects light in different directions. Because let's say like this, if it was flat, then the light would be reflected. But if it's carved, it's reflecting different, and that's why it shines. That's why a diamond is so unique, because it reflects light. Okay, so this one, this is the reason. One more characteristic of the Tetuani tiles is that you use the same colors, but in different places. The number of the colors used is very limited. It's white. This is dark brown, almost black. You have blue, and you have this brownish color, light brownish color. But it's used in different ways. For example, here you have this geometric form. This part is, let's say, brown, and here it's blue. Here is the opposite, where there's brown here and there's blue here. See, so it's the same geometric figure, but the colors are used in a variety of ways. That's another point. One more point is that because the colors, because each piece has been baked individually, and because the heat in the oven is not the same, even though the initial colors were the same, once they are baked, you have a variety of different shades of the same color. Like here you have this brownish color is not as dark as this one. Okay, so you know, the same pieces would be the same color, but you have different shades. This is slightly, for example, darker than this piece. So it's very interesting. One more point. The geometric designs or forms are specific to Tetuan. You don't find this decoration, this tile, in any other city in Morocco. It's typically Tetuani. In a very small area, you can find up to 7 different geometric designs. Like, for example, this is different from this one is different from this one. Here you have, you know, this is different from this one. And I once accompanied the director of the Brazilian Cultural Center here at Washington for a tour in some of the private houses in Tetuan. And when we finished, I told him, "Did you like the tour?" He said, "Yes, I really enjoyed it." I told him, "What is it that captured your imagination more?" He said, "The tiles." And because these are some of the samples, but there are many, many others. Like, for example, you have the entire floor of the courtyard. In some cases, I'll try to find one here. Yeah, like, for example, it's not very clear, but all these are tiles. And in some other pictures, so these are some of the later, very beautiful. I have a very impressive collection. So the tiles, as far as the construction materials are concerned, here, for example, notice the variety of the mosques. Limestone and brick is very important in this one, but here, for example, you find another one which is completely different. Because they were not built during the same century. That's why they're so different. But unfortunately, there isn't much information concerning this. This is tiles on a fountain, for example. You see the variety of the designs here. So I think I've spoken over my 45 minutes, so I would like to thank you. I didn't stick to the text because I thought it would be more interesting to do it this way. And there were many ideas which I wrote and which I did not express and which you can be able to see. But I would just like to conclude very briefly with a few ideas. The first idea is that the city of Tetouan and other Moroccan cities, North Moroccan cities, are going through a phase of economic development, especially in the field of urbanism. You have these enormous ugly buildings appearing right and left, and the extension of the city in the last 5 years has grown more than it had during the last 500 years, and so on. And so people are making a lot of money because there's also money from the smuggling activities, from the drug traffic activities, from the bureaucratic legal and illegal, let's say, activities. So there's big money and there's immigration, and not everybody is as interested in libraries and culture as we are. But in the Tetouan Asmir Association, we have, which was created in 1995, so we are about 11 years old, we stress the importance of the Medina, because we know that the developers are going to develop the coast because they're going to want to make a lot of money. We know that they're going to develop the new areas because they're going to make a lot of money. We know that they will perhaps enter the Ensanche, the Spanish town, which we also defend because it's unique to have a Spanish city built and very well conserved over the past 50 or 60 years. But the Medina of Tetouan for us is the most important part of Tetouan, and it is because it reflects our cultural heritage, our cultural identity, and not only for us but for the visitors who have a sensibility for culture. I think they're all happily surprised by what they see. I'm sure some of the people here did not expect to see what they saw. And the ties of Tetouan are also very strong. Like when I was in Peru, I visited the city of Cusco, and I was surprised to see that the wooden door of the cathedral there is very similar to many of the doors that you find in Tetouan or in Al-Andalus. And downtown Peru, the colonial section is very similar to some of the things that... And I gave a series of lectures at a private university there called the Catholic University, and there were times when the discussion lasted for as long as the lecture, and I'm speaking about a 2-hour lecture. People are fascinated by Al-Andalus as the source of their own culture, because because it is an important, or one of the main sources of the Spanish culture. And I was very, very surprised by the great interest that I found there. So this is the world cultural dimension. The specificity is very important because it reflects the authenticity of the city. And we think in the association, we sometimes agree, sometimes we disagree with the local authorities, especially the city council people, that it is important to start with the conservation and of many of these monuments. Like, for example, and we are not just talking in a passionate way. We send our students to do research in the Medina. Like, for example, during the past 5 months, I sent 2 girls to do a study of the biggest square in Tetouan, which unfortunately is the biggest and the ugliest square because you have so many peddlers and so on. But they did a field study, and the conclusion was that those peddlers would very much like to go elsewhere, provided the city council would help them find something which would serve as their living. Because the city council always says it's very difficult to touch this square because it's a social problem. If you tell these people to go somewhere, they will cause trouble, but that is not the case. And one of the interesting conclusions is that those poor people have a consciousness, they're fully aware of the cultural importance of the city, and they said, we don't like this square as it is, but we need to eat. So if you give us a job outside of the city, we'll be very happy to leave, and then you can do whatever you should do with the square. The other project, which our association thinks is very important from the social point of view, because we think that the square should be rehabilitated from the social point of view, because it will be able to, but the local authorities, they say we can't touch it from the social point of view because this might create a security problem, but we say no, the present situation is what creates the security problem. The other point is that of the cemetery. The cemetery, we have an Islamic cemetery, a Christian cemetery, and a Jewish cemetery. The Spaniards found financial support from the European Union, and they rehabilitated their cemetery. And even though you don't have many Spaniards who die in Tetuan and are buried there, although one was buried last week because she had bought a grave there, or her father had bought a grave there. He's one of the old Spanish Tetuans. You have many Spaniards who were born and raised in Tetuan and who are as proud of their belonging to Tetuan as we are. And Jews as well. We have Jews from Latin America who come, and for example, I had one university student saying, you know, could you please take me to see the Medina and the Jewish quarter, because my grandmother was born there, and she told me about, you know, the days when she used to live in Tetuan and all that, and he was really, really excited. And the same thing, I remember presenting some pictures of the Insanchi of Tetuan, and one in Barcelona, and where you have a lot of people from Andalusia living and working in there, and one lady burst out in tears. We told her, you know, what's the problem? This is a very nice church. She said, no, it's because I was married in that church. She hadn't seen it for about 40 or 50 years. So we think that the Islamic cemetery is in a terrible state. Unlike the Spanish, the Christian cemetery, the Jewish cemetery, we only have about maybe 15 Jews in Tetuan now, but there are others in Ceuta. They are there basically to take care of the belongings of the Jewish community. But their cemetery is very interesting because even though it's closed, but it's well protected, and there's a guard, and because their tombs have a very unique shape. It's unique. The Jewish cemeteries of Tetuan and Shawan are unique because some of the people buried there were expelled from Al-Andalus. So they're very old, and they maintained, and they're very nice and unique shapes. As far as the Islamic cemetery, we have a discussion with the city council. Maybe I'm not a bad scholar, but I don't think, even though I have a BA in political science, I'm not a very good diplomat, because a good diplomat never states what he thinks. So we tell them, here's what we think should be done. You know, things like you should build a wall, like you should clean the garbage where there's garbage. The graves should have a uniform shape. We think that you should have some lighting and other things. You should have some toilets. It's quite obvious, and so on. But they consider that people from an association should mind their own business, because they know how to administrate the city. And so we have been very patient, but there has come a point when we say, well, we spoke to you 2 years ago about this, and, you know, where's you know, you said yes. It's you know, so it's a very sensitive issue. The third project, which we think is very important, is that of the creation of a museum of the Mtamar or the Masmorras, because this museum, this church and prison is located in the heart of the city. So anyone who wants to see it from any part has to cross half of the city to get there, and that's one way to bring many people inside. And it's only 150 meters. But they're going about it the wrong way also, because they have other priorities. The fourth very important thing is the organization of commerce. You can't have visitors if many of... there was a time when these peddlers used to occupy the streets, but now it's the shopkeepers who have their own peddlers in order to prevent other peddlers from occupying the streets. And this is obviously the business of the city council, not us. And so, you know, we have some proposals like the restoration of many houses. And I have sent my students, and they have given me a detailed description of over 50 houses and their state, whether it's a good state, whether they're falling to pieces, whether, you know, and so on. So I think I have spoken for more time than I should. As I say, the reason is for about 30 years I used to stutter, and when I have been more or less cured, now I speak too much in order to make up for that lost time. Thank you very, very much for your patience.
Talk. You've given us just a taste of the architecture, the calligraphy, the corridors, the manuscripts, and so on. So we're all hoping to visit there, and we really look forward to working with you in the